Hello and welcome back to the Haunted Slumber. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to get comfortable, close your eyes, and let your mind drift. If you're enjoying these tales, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to know where you're listening from around the world. Now let the lights dim, the curtain rise, and may this story guide you into a deep, haunted sleep. Beneath the crooked willows. When the earth was still warm from the breath of day, and the sky sagged under a dull crimson haze, an old forgotten road twisted its way toward a place no map dared to name. A narrow trail, swallowed by fields of dying grass, slithered to the edge of an ancient forest, where crooked willows hunched like twisted giants clawing at the sky. For generations, whispers warned that something slumbered beneath their roots. Something old, something neither alive nor dead. The villagers gave the grove a wide berth, crossing themselves when foul winds carried the stink of rot from its borders. Children vanished, livestock died, their carcasses found bloated and blackened within days. And when the nights grew long and brittle, mournful moans could be heard, rising from the soil itself. No one lived near the grove anymore. No one save for the Wardwell family. Their farmhouse sagged at the edge of the forest, its timbers leaning as though too tired to hold themselves upright. The house was covered in strange carvings, glyphs no one dared touch. 7 stone pillars stood around the yard, each coiled with a black vine that pulsed as if with breath. Ruth Wardwell, the last of her line, kept the place alone. The villagers called her a witch, though she never claimed such a title. She tilled the dying soil in silence, watching the seasons rot and pass, until one autumn when the disappearances began anew. First a boy from the neighboring village went missing, then 2 hunters, then the village elder himself. Where search parties combed the woods, they found nothing, only deep, gaping holes in the earth, as if something massive had tunneled through. Fear gripped the village. They huddled in the old stone church, lighting candles against the dark, but no one dared approach the Wardwell land. No one but Pastor Andrew Cartwright, a man who believed evil could be banished with prayer and iron will. One bitter night, he left for the farmhouse, carrying a worn Bible and a silver cross. He never returned. Winter gnawed the land, but no snow touched the grove. Black sap oozed from the willow's roots, soaking into the frozen ground. On some nights, the wind carried whispers, words in no known tongue, slithering through the sleeping village. And then Martha Lawson arrived. She was a gaunt woman with hair like ash and eyes that caught no light. She claimed her bloodline had once tended these lands, long before the village was ever founded. She said she had come to seal old debts. With her arrival, the changes grew worse. In the moonlight, a sickly green mist began to curl over the fields. Homes groaned under unseen pressure. Frost traced skeletal fingers across the walls even though the air was warm. Scratching noises crept from the floors. Muted voices muttered behind closed doors. Martha often disappeared into the grove, carrying leather-bound tomes and jars filled with flickering things. Strange metallic instruments, crooked, corroded shapes, hung from her belt, clinking as she walked. She whispered spells beneath each doorstep. By then, even the boldest villagers boarded their windows and burned incense in the daylight. One morning, the wells turned black. The water stank of iron and decay. Those who drank from them fell into fever dreams, thrashing and howling like wolves, or else simply vanished, leaving behind neatly folded clothes and trails of soot. The grove grew thicker, hungrier. Roots burst through the village streets, cracking stone and pulling down homes. Children spoke of tall, shadowed figures that lurked outside their windows, waiting for the lamps to die. Only the old church and the crumbling schoolhouse stood against the tide. Within them, terrified souls prayed and wept, their voices swallowed by the gathering mist. And in the old Wardwell house, the windows glowed with an unnatural light. Something ancient was waking beneath the crooked willows. Something that remembered every oath broken, every debt unpaid, every soul once promised. And it was very, very hungry. The first true sign of the awakening came at dusk, when the sky bled into a shade of purple so deep it swallowed the sun whole. The wind fell silent, and even the crows, those tireless scavengers of the grove, vanished from the air, leaving the world suspended in breathless stillness. At the edge of the village, old Tom Weller staggered into the square, eyes wide and mouth trembling. "They're underneath," he croaked, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "They've come through the roots." Before anyone could stop him, Tom collapsed. His body twisted violently, contorting into unnatural angles, as if invisible hands puppeteered him. From his mouth poured not blood, but black soil, rich and wet, steaming against the cold stone. They buried Tom that night, though the ground itself seemed reluctant to accept him. The earth spat back the soil they shoveled, and by dawn, his grave was an open wound. The elders called an emergency gathering at the ruined church. Flickering candles cast long, trembling shadows across the cracked stone floor as arguments flared like wildfire. Some demanded they flee, others insisted on fighting. A few, hollow-eyed with terror, whispered of ancient pacts no one dared to name. At the heart of the debate, Martha Lawson stood silently, wrapped in a shawl woven with strange, glinting runes. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, carrying the weight of centuries. "The root of will stirs," she said, "and none among you are free of the debt." The villagers recoiled, muttering prayers and curses. Martha spoke of the first settlement, long before memory, when desperate men had knelt among the crooked willows and offered terrible bargains for survival. The land had prospered, but the price had merely been deferred, buried like a seed beneath the soil. Now the root demanded harvest. That night, the mist thickened into walls. Roads shifted, looping back on themselves. Lights flickered in distant fields, pale lanterns swinging gently in unseen hands. Those foolish enough to chase them were never seen again. The few who survived spoke of walking in endless circles, always returning to the same gnarled willow whose trunk bore a dark, weeping gash. Some swore they heard their own names called from the woods in voices half familiar, half wrong. And always, the faint rumbling beneath their feet, like something massive turning in restless sleep. In desperation, the villagers turned to old rites, digging through crumbling books and whispered legends. They built effigies of twisted branches and burned offerings of salt and bone. Martha watched, grim and unsmiling. "It is too late for charms," she said. "You must face the root itself. Only blood freely given can settle the debt." Few were willing to listen, but as the days shortened and the nights thickened, reality itself seemed to buckle. Doors led to wrong places. Mirrors reflected not faces, but yawning tunnels of black earth. Dreams tangled with waking, until no one could be sure what world they truly stood upon. Some villagers began to change. Their eyes grew dark, the irises sinking into endless pits. Their voices lost rhythm, speaking in flat, broken patterns, and their shadows moved independently, slipping across walls like stains. In the final days, the village resembled a rotted tooth, hollowed and crumbling from within. The last survivors barricaded themselves in the church, weaving crude wards of iron and ash. Outside, the ground heaved and cracked. Skeletal hands clawed up from the earth, ghostly, translucent, whispering in forgotten tongues. The crooked willows bent lower, their limbs creaking with anticipation. And at the center of it all, beneath the blackened soil, the root of will unfurled. A vast, ancient consciousness older than language, older than dreams. It remembered the taste of those who had bartered away their futures. It hungered for what it had been promised, and it would not be denied. The first night inside the church was a test of endurance. The iron wards sizzled whenever something brushed against the door, not hard enough to break through, but enough to shake the pews and rattle the crucifix hanging by a single nail. Martha stood vigil at the altar, whispering ancient litanies in a language even she barely understood. The others huddled in prayer or sat staring blankly into the dark corners where shadows gathered like hungry animals. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time folded strangely within the mist. The candles burned low, casting wide pools of wax across the cracked floor. It was Jeremiah Reed who first heard it, a voice, soft and pleading, coming from beneath the flagstones. "Let us in," it begged in the voice of his long-dead daughter. "It's so cold here. You promised you'd come back." Jeremiah staggered toward the sound, tears streaming down his cheeks. It took 3 men to hold him back as the stones began to bulge upward, as though something inside the earth pressed against them, desperate to be born. They reinforced the floor with salt and broken iron. They sang old hymns until their voices cracked and bled. But the root had patience. It had all the time that the villagers had forsaken. On the 3rd night, the walls of the church began to bleed. At first it was subtle, a dark dampness along the mortar, a faint metallic tang in the air. But by morning, rivulets of thick, black-red liquid oozed freely down the stone, pooling around the altar. Martha interpreted it grimly. "It means the barrier is failing," she said. "The land is trying to reclaim what it was promised. Soon, there will be no inside and outside, only below." The villagers grew desperate. They tore pages from sacred texts, burning them in makeshift fires. They carved protective symbols into the wood of the pews until splinters shredded their fingers. Still, one by one, people disappeared. Sometimes it was sudden, a scream, a blur of movement, and a shattered window swinging open to the mist. Sometimes it was slow, as if a person simply dissolved into the shadows when no one was looking, leaving only faint, muddy footprints behind. By the end of the 5th night, only 7 souls remained. It was then Martha revealed the final, bitter truth. "There is a way," she said, her voice hollow, "but it demands a willing sacrifice. One must walk into the root willingly and offer up their soul not in fear, but acceptance." The others recoiled in horror. But who would I? Before the words could finish, the earth trembled violently. The church bell, untouched, began to toll, a low, mournful knell that echoed across the mist-wrapped world. Through the broken windows, they saw them, the lantern-bearers. Figures cloaked in grave cloth, their faces obscured by shadow, each carrying a pale green lantern whose light barely penetrated the gloom. They moved silently, encircling the church, waiting, inviting. It was Eleanor Hart who rose first, the village midwife, who had delivered more lives into the world than anyone could count. "I have lived long," she said simply, "and I have debts of my own." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped into the mist. The lantern bearers parted, allowing her passage. They watched as Eleanor knelt before the gnarled willow at the heart of the grove. The tree's wound, the ancient gash leaking black mist, widened to receive her. She did not scream. She sang, a low, broken lullaby that seemed to stitch the fabric of the air back together. When the mist cleared, the village was different. Quieter, older, more real somehow, but fundamentally changed. The ground still whispered. The crooked trees still loomed. But the hunger of the root was sated. For now, the survivors left Hollowmere that very night, walking outward until the mist thinned and the world righted itself. But they carried its mark. In dreams, they would hear the low rumble of something vast shifting beneath the soil. In mirrors, they would glimpse pale lights flickering in the corners of their eyes. And when the wind blew just right, they would smell it. The damp, rich scent of freshly turned earth and the faintest echo of a woman's lullaby carried on the wind. They knew deep down that debts never vanished. They merely waited until the next harvest. Decades later, Hollowmere was a name lost to maps. The forests had thickened, roads crumbled into moss-choked trails, and even the birds avoided flying over that place. But the land remembered. In a nearby city, a boy named Thomas Vale began to dream. He saw a cabin with a sagging roof, a willow tree bleeding mist into cracked earth. He saw lanterns swinging in the fog, and beneath it all, something vast and slow-moving, a mass of roots and bones and memory. Thomas was 17 when he first woke in the night, dirt under his fingernails with the smell of damp moss in his hair. He didn't understand then. He thought it was madness. Doctors prescribed pills and hospital stays, but nothing could sever the invisible thread that tied him to Hollowmere. The root had marked his bloodline, and it was calling him home. Thomas's mother, Eleanor Vale, had always hidden a deep scar that ran down her left side, a souvenir of a place she would never speak of, a place her mother and her mother before her had vowed to forget. But silence had never been protection. It had only fed the hunger. The root thrived on denial, on secrets, on the slow, inevitable pull of destiny. And when Thomas disappeared from his bed one gray morning, no one could trace where he had gone, except Eleanor. Deep down, she knew. And though every instinct screamed at her to run the other way, she packed a bag and followed. The forest swallowed her car within miles. Roads gave way to brambled paths, paths to tangled dead ends. Mist crept up from the ground in coiling tendrils. The air grew heavy, sweet with rot. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled. Eleanor pressed on, heart hammering. Old hymns rattled in her mind, scraps of half-remembered prayers. She found Thomas kneeling at the base of a willow tree that had grown impossibly large, its bark blackened, its branches clawing the sky. Around him stood the lantern bearers, silent, patient, waiting. Thomas turned to her, his eyes no longer his own. "Mother," he whispered, voice layered with dozens of others. "It's so beautiful below the earth. They showed me." He reached out a hand. Roots snaked from his fingertips, pulsing faintly with a heartbeat not his own. Eleanor stumbled back, but she knew running was useless. She had two choices: leave him here to be absorbed by the root, or descend with him and face whatever lay beneath. Her hands trembled. The mist thickened. Above, crows circled, cawing in a language too old for human tongues. And the ground beneath her feet began to crack open, revealing a staircase spiraling down into darkness. Without another word, Eleanor took her son's hand. Together, they stepped into the earth. The soil closed above them like a mouth. The lanterns flickered once, then went out. And Hollowmere, that cursed patch of forgotten land, sighed in satisfaction. Its family had returned. Its memory would live on. The descent was endless. Eleanor and Thomas walked for what felt like days through tunnels of twisted roots and ancient bones. The air was thick with whispers, fragments of old conversations, long-forgotten songs, lullabies crooned by dead mothers to dust-born children. The deeper they went, the more the earth seemed to breathe around them. Walls pulsed and flexed. Faint glimmers of green light pulsed like heartbeat rhythms. At last, they came to a great cavern. In its center stood an altar of black stone, wrapped in chains made of melted iron and broken promises. And upon it, writhing and endless, grew the heart of the root. It was not a tree, nor an animal, nor anything born of sane nature. It was memory itself, the collected fear and sorrow and betrayal of 1,000 generations, condensed into a living thing that hungered only for more. And Thomas, smiling, approached it without hesitation. Eleanor realized too late. This was not a rescue. This was a sacrifice. Thomas had been chosen long before he was born. The root did not merely feed on souls. It seeded them, planting darkness into bloodlines, nurturing them across centuries until they bore ripe fruit. Thomas was such a fruit, and now he would be replanted to spread the root beyond Hollowmere, into the waking world, into cities, into dreams, into everyone, unless Eleanor could do the unthinkable, unless she could break the cycle with fire, with blood, with sacrifice. She made her choice, clutching the iron dagger she had hidden in her coat, a relic of the old rituals, etched with forbidden symbols. Eleanor ran forward. Thomas turned. For a brief instant, she saw her real son behind the veil, terrified, pleading. Then the root surged through him again, twisting his form into something pale and spindly, with too many joints bending the wrong way. Eleanor plunged the dagger deep into the heart. The cavern screamed. The walls collapsed inward. Roots flailed like wounded serpents. Thomas reached for her with blackened hands, but she caught him in a final, desperate embrace, whispering lullabies he had long forgotten. "Sleep, my love," she said. "Sleep and be free." The world exploded in green fire. When rescuers found the site weeks later, there was nothing left but a scorched circle where no grass would ever grow again. No bodies, no ruins, only the faint scent of damp earth and a lingering whisper on the wind. Sleep, sleep? Most forgot the story. Time buried it beneath new towns and roads. But sometimes on fog-heavy nights, travelers would glimpse lanterns swinging in the mist, would hear lullabies sung in a dozen broken tongues, would dream of tangled roots tightening around their hearts. And deep below, far below even memory, the root slumbered, waiting for rain, waiting for blood, waiting to grow again.